The air felt taut, almost electric, as dawn broke over the horizon, casting a smoky hue across the ruined landscape of Stalingrad. It was late November, and the biting cold gnawed at the bones of every soldier, every civilian desperately clinging to life amidst the chaos. As the sun rose, it shone upon a city that had become a battleground, a testimony to resilience against the odds, a living embodiment of human courage in the face of despair. The cacophony of warfare was a bitter song that had been playing without pause, resonating through the shattered streets and crumbling buildings. Standing in the remnants of what was once a lively street market, Lieutenant Alexei Volkov stared through a pair of cracked binoculars, his gaze fixed across the narrow Volga River, where enemy tanks rumbled in the distance, silhouetted against the rising sun like iron beasts rising from the ashes. The Luftwaffe roared ominously overhead, their engines drowning out the voices of the few survivors hoping for the distant sound of salvation by the Red Army. Volkov, a soldier with months of relentless combat etched into the lines of his youthful face, felt the weight of his command pressing down like an anvil. He was one of the few remaining officers who had managed to hold the lines while so many around them had fallen. "Sir, we need to pull back," Private Dmitry Orlov urged, shivering as he pointed towards the horizon where plumes of smoke curled upwards like ominous specters. Twice their defensive lines had been breached. Twice they had managed to hold against the tide of German advancements. The latest reports indicated that the Axis forces were regrouping, their tanks and infantry aimed directly at their position. The words tumbled out nervously, but there was no mistaking the urgency behind them. "I know, Dmitry," Volkov replied, his voice hoarse against the morning chill. "But we cannot abandon this position. If we retreat now, they will overrun our supply lines. Stalingrad is not just a city, it's the last bastion of hope." The expression on Dmitry's face was a fragile mixture of horror and determination, one that mirrored the thoughts swirling in the hearts of the other soldiers as they huddled around a barely functioning radio transmitter, seeking reassurance or even a glimmer of hope from their leaders. A lost signal. The static rumbled in their ears, mocking their plea for news, for strategy, for reassurance. In a city divided by rubble and despair, faith became a fading ember. As night fell, the Germans, never one to relent, pushed their advantage under the cover of darkness. The contested streets of Stalingrad became hellish, illuminated only by bursts of gunfire and the fiery trails of artillery shells. Volkov and his men dug trenches deeper beneath the crumbling facades of buildings, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, a fear they wore like a second skin. Such was the darkness that threatened to envelop their spirits. On that fateful night, screams pierced the air as their lines were breached. Volunteers from the Soviet Union and desperate civilians alike fought tooth and nail alongside the soldiers. But as chaos erupted, the real fear began to set in. A young medic, a bright-eyed girl named Anna, darted through the darkness, clutching her medical kit as she tended to the wounded huddling in makeshift shelters. Her hands were trembling not just from the cold, but from the constant dread that those she rushed to save would become lost in the maelstrom of war. "Keep fighting, keep breathing," she yelled, her voice strained yet defiant, as she patched up a soldier who had lost so much blood. Each life she saved seemed hard-won amidst a landscape of death, but her heart ached for the certainty that each moment was fleeting. The high-pitched screech of a shell cut through the air, and in that instant a building exploded, sending shards of concrete flying. Volkov stumbled as the shockwave knocked him back, but he quickly regained his footing and yelled, "We must hold our ground." As the cries of the wounded echoed in his ears, he felt a sharp pinprick of fear, a fear he had buried under layers of duty and purpose. That fear lay in the thought that perhaps this time he would not be able to pull his men back from the brink. Daylight brought no relief, only a grim acceptance of the reality they faced. Reports floated in, detailing the chilling news that their allies who had promised reinforcements were delayed. The realization coursed through Volkov's veins like icy poison. Surrounded, outgunned, and with dwindling supplies, Stalingrad echoed with the haunting recruitment of souls to the cause. As hours turned to days, the looming specter of supplies running low began to gnaw at the soldiers' senses. Food rations were reduced to mere morsels, and water became a precious commodity, each drop lovingly sipped, rationed with care. Volkov organized patrols, tasking Dmitry with scouting for food among the rubble. As he left, full of trepidation, Volkov chided himself for sending out the young man into the unknown. Night descended yet again, feeling heavier than the last, as noise mutated from distant artillery fire to earth-shattering explosions. Volkov gathered his remaining men, their faces gaunt but filled with resolute determination. They were few, but they were stubborn, a band of soldiers who had tasted both victory and defeat. Tonight we will prove our worth. Hold fast to one another. The hope of our country lies within these battlegrounds, Volkov spoke, his voice a rallying cry amidst despair. He felt their hearts resonate with his simple words. A fragile flicker of courage ignited among them. Just then, a faint sound arose from the edges of the city. The rumble of approaching tanks reverberated through the air, as familiar as the hot bites of gunfire. It was into this grave moment that sheer desperation led Volkov's small band to make a decision. They would take the fight to the Germans themselves, while Dmitri and a few others scoured the ruins for survivors and supplies. Volkov knew the dangers that lay ahead, but as he and 3 sturdy fighters crawled through the maze of debris, they made their way toward the enemy's stronghold, hopeful to disrupt operations for even a moment. The stench of diesel and blood hung in the air, a nauseating mix that turned the world to a hazy, nightmarish dream. As they crept closer, they saw their chance, a small outpost where German soldiers gathered, laughter mingling with the dangerous air of arrogance. And then, in a flurry of movement, Volkov raised his weapon and signaled to his men. The ensuing firefight was chaotic, the sound of gunfire drowned out by the screams of men caught between duty and despair. Volkov ducked and rolled, firing at shadows that danced with menacing intention. Each bullet screamed a prayer, a plea for survival. Yet in that visceral moment, heart pounding furiously against his chest, he felt something shift within. The fight was not merely for the blood and land, but for dignity. It was the spirit that fueled every soldier that served as the last bastion against tyranny. As dawn broke once more, hope flickered dimly. They returned from their ambush, barely alive but frankly ablaze with a wild sense of victory. The disruption they caused might well have stemmed the tide, however temporarily, and Volkov's heart beat slightly easier for a moment. They returned to the crumbling shelter, pulling in a few survivors they found wandering in shock amidst the ruins. Anna and Dmitri were waiting. When they finally saw those broken but breathing bodies staggering through the cold, joy washed the blood from their foreheads. Volkov couldn't find words, hardly a smile. Not yet. They sat, shivering in the chill, staring into each other's eyes as if willing their connection to drive away the horrors that surrounded them. But even as they celebrated their small victory, the harbingers of tragedy stood at the edge of their consciousness. The knowledge that darkness loomed was unshakable, and it came in brutal waves. Waves that crashed against the remnants of their spirit, slashing at the hope that had sparked within. The Germans, relentless and tactical, retaliated swiftly, pushing their advantage with renewed vigor. The next fight came brutally, without mercy or the grieving sense of camaraderie they once shared. Each fallen comrade was another chink of shattered hope, weighing heavily upon Volkov's shoulders. With every scream, every prayer sent from the lips of the wounded and dying, the resolve of the men clashed with despair as the odds tilted hopelessly against them. Eventually, nature herself chose that moment to join the fray, as winter unleashed its full fury, ice creeping through bones and freezing every ounce of warmth that might have clung to the spirit. The battlefield wore scars of ice and blood blended. Friendship turned into an ancient bond built on loss and a shared will to endure the inevitable. The air hung thick with human misery and the desperation to cling to every breath. With resources dwindling and time slipping through their fingers, Volkov felt the threads of conscience fray as he looked toward the horizon where a dark line of smoke swirled, a sign that their men at the front were collapsing like a house of cards. "Prioritize the wounded," he ordered, frantically shuffling the men in different directions under the sound of heavy artillery. Rescuing those who could still fight became their desperate mission, and every prisoner they liberated brought tears and blood. Any attempt at normalcy that could be grasped was suffocated by reality. As desperate hours turned into one long night, hope flickered like a candle in the wind. The once vibrant street corner where laughter rang out stood silent. Only the moans of the wounded reverberated through the storm. On those frozen streets, men fell, women wept, and children cried. The gradual hollowing out of humanity became painfully apparent. Their courage was no longer enough. Even the steadfast bravado of Volkov began to wear thin amidst the endless bloodshed and loss. In a world destroyed by hatred, he found meaning in the simple gestures of survival and spirit. Anna's hands weaving together the torn remains of the medical supplies to salvage what remained. Dmitri singing softly in the darkness, their whispers filling the voids left by gunshots that echoed long into the night. As they battled against time, they fought not just for the city of Stalingrad, but for each other. The feeling of dread filled their hearts. Ghosts of fallen comrades haunted their dreams, yet they found solace in laughter, a shared sense of brotherhood stitching them closer than mere men in uniforms. But fate had a different plan. With every fleeting moment came an inevitable reckoning. Their fight grew fiercely strained as days wore into desperation and numbness. One twilight hour, as shadows lunged across the ruins, the final assault came crashing down all around them, turning friends into memories. The chaos consumed everything. As Volkov lay trapped beneath the ruins of crumbling bricks, an eerie silence swallowed the battlefield. And then, like a tragically beautiful symphony, those aching hearts beat as one, each brother there willing to push forward against the tide, against despair. In time, as Soviet forces rallied their strength, whispered promises of belief in a brighter future kindled hope once more. Days dragged into weeks, yet the battle for Stalingrad became a moment locked within the annals of history, filled with sacrifice, triumphs, and heart-wrenching tears. In the days that followed, amidst the flood of reinforcements and battered soldiers, the once ruined city morphed into a crucible of resilience, forcing an indomitable spirit to rise. The cold shrieks of war had become rich with lessons of humanity, love found even in destruction, honor in sacrifice, and a will forged in fire. As the dust settled on the wreckage, Volkov emerged, fragile yet unbroken. The echoes of loss would haunt him eternally, an imprint upon his soul. In the weeks that turned to months, he came to understand that victory lay not merely in winning battles, but in holding tightly to the flames of hope. Through every frozen ashen dawn, through laughter amid despair, the heartbeats of those who loved and lived amidst war, Stalingrad would take its place in history, both as a scarred battlefield and a testament to the grit and resilience of humanity, a beacon to the bittersweet nature of survival, the true cost of conflict writ large across an era defined by tragedy and triumph. For Volkov, his memories would forever echo of those thrown together, and that flicker of humanity amid darkness would burn long after the last shots were fired, lighting the path toward a brighter dawn.